The G7 summit was in full swing in a high-tech, sleek conference room overlooking the glittering waters of the Atlantic Ocean. World leaders from the 7 most powerful nations had gathered, each prepared for long days of intense negotiation. The usual diplomatic talks about global trade, security, and climate change filled the air, with experts and aides bustling around, preparing materials and analyzing data. Yet, in the midst of the well-oiled machinery of international politics, one person was quietly at the center of attention: Donald Trump. He walked into the room with the kind of presence only a few can command. The crowd of diplomats and leaders turned to watch him as he took his seat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, but his eyes as sharp as ever. Today, he wasn't just another world leader at a summit. He was about to make a statement that would reverberate across the globe. The conference began as expected, with various leaders discussing the critical issues of the day. Prime Minister Theresa May of the UK talked about Brexit and economic stability. Chancellor Angela Merkel addressed climate change, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe discussed international trade relations. They all spoke in carefully crafted tones, each aware of their audience and the weight their words would carry. But there was an undercurrent of anticipation. Everyone knew that when Donald Trump spoke, it wasn't just for political gain. His words had the power to sway markets, change the course of negotiations, and, most notably, to challenge the status quo. Finally, after hours of talks, the moment arrived. Trump leaned forward, clearing his throat. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "I've been listening," Trump began, his voice calm yet powerful. "And while I respect all your opinions, I think it's time we take a different approach. The world doesn't need more talk, it needs action. And that's exactly what I plan to do." A murmur swept through the room. The other leaders exchanged glances, intrigued but cautious. Was this going to be another of Trump's trademark bombshell moments? He didn't wait for them to respond. He turned to his aides and gestured for them to present a document. On the screen behind him, a massive chart appeared. It was a bold proposal for a new international trade agreement, one that would put America's interests at the forefront, with a unique approach to tariffs and global supply chains. The plan was unprecedented, a sharp deviation from the past, breaking away from years of diplomatic compromise. The room was still. For a moment, it felt like the air had thickened. Leaders of other nations stared at the screen, some in disbelief, others in confusion. Was Trump seriously suggesting they abandon the well-established protocols of global trade to adopt something so audacious? Then, to everyone's surprise, Trump continued with a direct challenge to the international order. "This isn't about just business," he said, eyes scanning the room. "This is about saving our people from what has been a system designed for the benefit of a few. We can't keep running on old ideas. We need to be bold. We need to change." A few moments passed, and the tension was palpable. For once, the usually composed leaders were unsure how to respond. This wasn't a typical Trump speech. This was a clear, direct challenge to the global establishment, and it was clear that the ripple effects would be profound. At that moment, the world realized Donald Trump wasn't just at the G7 summit to follow the script. He was here to rewrite it. As the room continued to buzz with murmurs, a few leaders exchanged uneasy glances. The proposal on the screen was unlike anything they had encountered before. While they had all become accustomed to Trump's bold rhetoric, they hadn't expected this kind of seismic shift. His plan was not just an economic adjustment. It was a challenge to the foundation of the global trade system that had been carefully built over decades. Angela Merkel, her brows furrowed, spoke up first, her voice steady yet tinged with skepticism. "Mr. Trump," she began, "we understand your concerns, but this approach is not only aggressive. It undermines decades of multilateral cooperation. The world is interconnected. Our economies rely on one another." Her words were measured, but the tension in her voice was hard to miss. Theresa May, looking more disoriented than usual, added, "This could destabilize relationships that have taken years to foster." You can't simply tear down what we've worked to build without understanding the consequences. She paused, as if searching for the right words to make her point more forcefully. What you're suggesting could lead to trade wars and economic isolation. Trump, unfazed by the pushback, leaned back in his chair and smiled. A smile that only those who knew him well would recognize as a precursor to his next move. He wasn't one to back down easily, and he wasn't about to do so now. Isolation? No, you've misunderstood, Trump responded. This is about making fair deals, not holding on to outdated systems that benefit a few at the expense of many. I'm not advocating for isolation. I'm advocating for fairness. America has been playing by your rules for too long, and it's time we set a new standard, one that actually works for the people. The room fell into silence again. The gravity of Trump's words seemed to hang in the air, waiting for someone to break the tension. French President Emmanuel Macron, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. But your plan, Donald. He stopped, adjusting his glasses before continuing. It's too radical. It doesn't take into account the complexities of a global economy that has evolved over years. How will we work together if you push this agenda forward? His tone was cautious, but the disbelief in his voice was apparent. Trump's response was as calm as ever, but his words hit hard. We can't keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. Every year, more people are left behind. More jobs are lost to unfair trade practices. We're not asking for the world to collapse. We're asking for a new agreement that benefits everyone. If that means breaking free from old structures, so be it. As the debate continued, the eyes of the world's media were now fully focused on the G7 summit. Cameras flashed, capturing every interaction as the tension in the room continued to rise. Foreign diplomats began whispering amongst themselves, exchanging opinions on Trump's bold stance. The weight of the moment was undeniable. The world was watching closely, waiting to see how the situation would unfold. Suddenly, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe spoke, his voice carrying an air of calm resolve. I understand where you're coming from, Donald, but we must also be cautious about the larger implications. Trade agreements are not just about economics. They're about diplomacy, alliances, and mutual respect between nations. He glanced at Trump, his eyes studying him carefully. If we start making decisions based solely on what's best for one country, we risk eroding the trust that underpins our relationships. Trump didn't flinch. He met Abe's gaze and responded, and if we don't put our countries first, who will? I'm not here to tear down relationships, Shinzo. I'm here to rebuild them, stronger than they've ever been. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room from Trump's supporters, many of whom were quietly nodding. His words, though divisive, seemed to resonate with some. This wasn't just a matter of policy. It was a matter of leadership. The world had seen how Trump had led America through turbulent times, and it was clear that he wasn't going to play by anyone's rules but his own. The debate continued for hours, with each leader offering their own opinions, pushing back against Trump's proposal. Some argued for collaboration, others for caution, but the former president's resolve remained unshaken. He wasn't just participating in the summit. He was using it as a platform to change the very dynamics of global politics. And then, just as the session seemed to reach its peak, Trump did something unexpected. He stood up abruptly and called for a break, his voice commanding attention. Let's take a break, he said, his tone sharp but measured. We'll reconvene in an hour, but I want everyone to think about this. This isn't about America versus the world. It's about making sure the world works for everyone. And that's a conversation we need to have. With that, he walked out of the room, leaving the world's leaders to reconsider their positions. The weight of his challenge lingered long after he left. The next step, it seemed, would come down to whether these leaders were willing to embrace a new world order, one shaped by the man they had come to know as a disruptor. The hour-long break was more than just a pause in the proceedings. It was a moment of deep reflection for the leaders at the G7 summit. While Trump walked outside for a brief respite, his words echoed in the minds of his fellow leaders. each grappling with the magnitude of the challenge he had presented. In private rooms, aides and advisors hurriedly strategized, trying to assess the implications of Trump's radical approach. Meanwhile, the world's media waited eagerly for what would come next. Speculation ran wild. Would Trump push forward with his proposal, ignoring the concerns of his allies? Would the summit descend into chaos? Or would this bold move open the door to a new era of international cooperation, reshaping global economics forever? When the summit resumed, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was thick with tension, but there was an undercurrent of something else too: curiosity. Trump had thrown down the gauntlet, and it was clear that no one in the room could ignore the gravity of the moment. The media filled the room with cameras, their lenses trained on the gathering like vultures waiting for the next move. Trump returned to the podium, his expression resolute but not angry. He had made his case, and now it was time for the world to respond. "I hope you've all had time to think," Trump said, his voice strong but calm. "What I'm proposing is not just about economics. It's about the future. It's about whether we are willing to continue doing things the old way or whether we are ready to embrace a new reality, one that benefits everyone, not just a few at the top." The room was silent. Even the most seasoned leaders of the world's most powerful countries were unsure how to respond. What could they say to a man who had spent his life turning traditional norms upside down, who had never been afraid to challenge the status quo, even if it meant alienating allies? Prime Minister May, her tone still cautious, was the first to speak. "Mr. Trump, we understand your concerns, but the global community has always been a balance of interests. What you're proposing might push us toward conflict rather than collaboration." Trump's gaze shifted from May to Merkel, who had remained quiet throughout the break. The German chancellor's furrowed brows revealed the weight of the decision before her. But it was Macron who spoke next, his voice firm but tinged with unease. "Donald, this isn't just about your country. We're talking about global stability here. If one country steps out, it could unravel everything we've worked for." Trump nodded, acknowledging the truth in Macron's words. "I hear you," he said, "but it's time to face the reality. The world as it is now isn't working for everyone. It's time we build something that does." There was a long pause, a pregnant silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, without warning, Trump turned to the assembly of leaders and delivered his closing argument. "You all say you want change, but you're afraid to act," he said. "This isn't just about trade deals. This is about rewriting the rules. The status quo is holding us back, and I won't sit here while everyone else gets ahead at America's expense. I'm doing what needs to be done, not just for America, but for the world." As Trump finished speaking, the room remained quiet. No one knew how to respond. It was clear that he had shaken the foundations of the summit. Even the most ardent supporters of global cooperation were left questioning the future. Would the world continue to embrace outdated systems? Or would they, for the first time in history, come together to create a truly fair and inclusive global economy? After a long moment, Merkel spoke once again, her voice weary but thoughtful. Maybe we need to take a step back and look at this differently. The world is changing, and perhaps it's time for us to change with it." Trump's eyes gleamed with a rare combination of satisfaction and determination. He had made his point. The summit wasn't just a meeting. It was a pivotal moment in history, a point of no return. And so, after hours of intense discussions, the G7 summit came to a close, not with a resolution, but with the world leaders left in contemplation, grappling with Trump's bold proposal. No one could deny it. He had left an indelible mark on global politics. What would come next was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Trump had shaken the foundations of diplomacy, and the world would never be the same. The cameras flashed once again as Trump stood up, his demeanor unchanged. He had stirred the pot, and the world would now have to reckon with the consequences. As he walked out of the room, Trump's last words resonated in the minds of the other leaders. If you want to change the world, sometimes you've got to break the old one first. And with that, the The summit was over, but the world's attention remained fixed on the path Trump had forged. Would they follow, or would they resist, fearing the changes that lay ahead? The answers would unfold in the days to come. But for now, Trump had made his mark, and the world would never look at the global order the same way again.